September 27, 1943. Camp Swift, Texas. Under a burning midday sun, a column of exhausted German prisoners, many still in dust-covered wear tunics, stopped dead in their tracks as an impossible scene unfolded before them. A group of American teenagers laughing beside a soda fountain. A young black doctor stepping out of a clinic. And, across the street, a woman in overalls climbing into the cab of a tractor like she owned the place. Two men raised under totalitarian rule, conditioned to believe in racial hierarchy, propaganda, and scarcity as the natural order of the world. This ordinary American street looked like something scripted by Allied intelligence. Yet nothing here was staged. It was simply life that would upend their understanding of everything they had been told to believe. By early 1943, the United States found itself custodian of a problem it had not fully anticipated. Tens of thousands of German soldiers captured in North Africa. As the surrender of the Africa Corps unfolded in May, the numbers snowballed. By war's end, nearly 425,000 German POWs would be shipped to American soil, an operation so vast that it spanned 46 states, 700 camps, and thousands of small communities that had never seen an enemy soldier before. According to U.S. Army Provost Marshal records and International Red Cross reports, the plan was simple: remove the POWs from combat, treat them under the Geneva Convention, and use their labor to alleviate wartime shortages. But no one foresaw what the prisoners themselves would experience: a confrontation with a radically different society. The German state had told its soldiers that America was decadent, chaotic, racially degenerate, and collapsing under economic turmoil. Nazi education manuals described the U.S. as a mongrel wasteland. Propaganda films portrayed African Americans as subhuman and insisted women who worked outside the home symbolized moral. Yet the America the POWs encountered, messy, loud, imperfect, abundant, was nothing like the caricature. What stunned them most was not military might, but the casual freedom that saturated everyday life. A waitress criticizing President Roosevelt aloud. A white sergeant chatting with a black truck driver as equal. Children playing without fear of police raids or political informers. These mundane sights struck deeper than any leaflet dropped over the German line. Meanwhile, unknown to both guards and prisoners, the U.S. War Department's own internal documents would later describe these camps as accidental laboratories in democratic exposure. No propaganda films were needed, just proximity, work, and a front row seat to a system that functioned without terror. The journey began in silence. Packed aboard Liberty ships leaving Oran, Tunis, and Casablanca, thousands of German POWs, sunburned, hungry, and dazed from the collapse of the Africa Corps, were marched below deck. As the anchors lifted, many still expected to be taken to England, or perhaps remain indefinitely on the North African coast. Only days into the crossing did rumors start. America. SIU bring in uns nach America. For many, America was a mythical place of skyscrapers and gangsters. Others imagined bleak camps in deserts patrolled by brutal guards. Darkness swallowed the hold each night as diesel fumes seeped through the vents and waves slammed the hull. Officers whispered assurances of eventual repatriation, but no one believed them. By the time the New York skyline appeared, steel towers glinting like impossible monuments, the prisoners pressed their faces to the porthole. Some gasped, others cursed, a few wept quietly. Reinhold Pabel, who would later escape a Midwestern camp and write about the experience, recalled, if this is the land we were told was collapsing, what must the rest of the country look like? It was the first hairline crack in their worldview. When they disembarked at New York Harbor or Norfolk or Boston, the first shock hit fast. U.S. military police stood waiting with rifles slung casually over their shoulders, not intense, snapping lines like the SS guards at German camp, but relaxed, even bored. Dock workers hauled crates of food and coffee. Civilian volunteers moved freely within sight of the prisoners. Several POWs noted the strangeness. Why are there no police dogs, no screaming officers? The smell of hot pretzels drifting from a nearby vendor made one captured sergeant whisper, "We have lost the war for sure. These people have everything." Unaware of the psychological impact they were already making, American guards issued instructions calmly: form to line, keep moving, no running, you'll get fed shortly. The tone alone unsettled the POWs firm, but without the menace they had learned to expect. From the ports, trains carried the prisoners deep into the American interior. As miles of farmland rolled past endless wheat fields in Kansas, pine forests in Georgia, snow on the Rockies, many Germans felt they were traveling through an empire so vast and rich it made their own homeland seem small. Camp Swift in Texas, Camp Algona in Iowa, Camp Opelika in Alabama, Camp McCoy in Wisconsin, names they had never heard, became their new home. The camps themselves varied. Some were sprawling complexes with movie theaters, libraries, and sports fields. Others were no more than barracks ringed by barbed wire. But everywhere, The POWs noticed something baffling. American guards joked with prisoners, tossed them cigarettes, and even played soccer with them. One guard at Camp Bow told a stunned German lieutenant, "You're our guests until the war ends. Just don't cause trouble." The word guests lodged in many minds. Soon, the prisoners encountered the kind of sight that Nazi ideology insisted was impossible. Many POW labor detachments were assigned to hospitals, farms, or road crews. And there, for the first time, they saw black and white Americans working side by side, sometimes with whites taking orders from black supervisors. This alone was enough to make some Germans stare openly. At Camp Swift, a black doctor treated several injured Wehrmacht prisoners after a work accident. One POW, Hermann Böttcher, later wrote in astonishment, "In Germany, this man would be beaten in the street. Here he gave orders to white nurses, and they obeyed without question. The doctor stitched wounds, bandaged cuts, and offered the prisoners water." One young German, unable to process the moment, muttered, "This cannot be real." The guards shrugged. To them, it was simply Tuesday. If racial equality unsettled the POWs, the role of American women nearly uprooted their entire mental framework. On farms and in factories, women drove tractors, welded steel, operated lathes, and managed payroll offices. The Rosie the Riveter era was in full force, and every time a German POW was assigned to labor near a factory, he encountered women not as secretaries or domestic workers but as skilled laborers and supervisors. Georg Gärtner, later infamous as the German POW who escaped and lived underground for decades, remembered watching a group of women at a Colorado beet farm instructing German soldiers on how to harvest properly. "They spoke to us as if we were boys," he recalled, and the American men accepted this without shame. For soldiers raised in a militarized patriarchy, it was almost unthinkable. Nothing challenged the prisoners' worldview more than American speech. Everywhere they worked, civilians spoke openly, sometimes loudly, about politics. Farmers criticized President Roosevelt. Factory workers mocked General. Truck drivers cursed government fuel rationing. Newspapers on breakroom tables carried sharp editorials. Radio broadcasts featured heated debates. At Camp McCoy, a Wisconsin farmer told a bewildered POW work crew, "The president's a good man, but he's wrong about these taxes." The Germans expected him to glance around in fear, but he didn't. He just spat into the dirt and kept talking. One prisoner whispered, "If we said such things in Germany, we would disappear." This realization spread fast. America, even in wartime, had no Gestapo. No one vanished for complaining. Many cliffhanger. One evening, an act of kindness would ripple through an entire camp. In Texas, a group of American families sent Christmas presents, small things, candy, soap, knitted socks, to German POWs who had picked cotton on their farm. When guards handed out the packages, silence settled over the barrack. Some prisoners cried. Others refused the gifts at first, thinking it was a humiliating trick. But the families simply said, "It's Christmas. You worked hard. You deserve something too." Reinhold Pabel remembered a farmer's wife who told him, "My boy is fighting in France. I pray some mother over there is kind to him." Such moments pierced even hardened Nazis. A prisoner from the 90th Light Africa Division later confessed, "We were told Americans were barbarians, but barbarians do not give Christmas gifts to the enemy." Over time, the camps themselves became learning environments. Under the Geneva Convention, POWs were allowed educational classes, newspapers, debates, and even elections for camp spokesmen. German officers initially tried to control this system, enforcing Nazi discipline. But American camps often restricted the influence of die-hard Nazis by separating them into different compounds. In many camps, especially by 1944, moderate and anti-Nazi prisoners gained influence. Work detachments further eroded ideological rigidity. Picking cotton beside black laborers in Texas, harvesting sugar beets in Colorado, milling lumber in Oregon, the Germans saw ordinary Americans living without fear of the state. Food was plentiful. Waste was astonishing. At one cannery, a German prisoner stared at discarded produce and whispered, "In Germany, we would fight over this." As months passed, many prisoners noted what America lacked. No political police patrolled the streets. No portraits of the leader hung in public buildings. No loudspeakers blasted propaganda. Ordinary citizens complained about wartime shortages without being punished. Clergy preached freely. Colleges operated normally. Strike votes occurred during the war and people openly supported or opposed them. One POW teacher said, "It is not the abundance that astonishes us. It is the freedom." Even more shocking, American guards sometimes allowed prisoners to read German newspapers captured from U-boat crews, papers filled with Nazi triumphalism the POWs now recognized as lies. By 1944, thousands of German prisoners wrote in their memoirs that they had begun to feel like spectators studying another political universe. Many cliffhanger. A moment on an Iowa farm would mark a turning point. A farmer asked a POW crew foreman, "Do you boys want lemonade?" Without thinking, He placed his shotgun used for coyotes, not prisoners, on the porch and walked inside. The foreman stared at the open doorway. He could have escaped, but he didn't. No one did. If he trusts us, the foreman later said, then our hatred is pointless. The War Department took note. Reports circulated that German POWs returned to camp speaking admiringly of American fairness. Many still hated the idea of defeat, but they could not deny what they had witnessed. Not all prisoners accepted these revelations. Hardcore National Socialists attempted to enforce ideological purity, forming secret cells that beat or killed moderates. Several POWs were murdered inside U.S. camps for being traitors or Democrats. American authorities responded by isolating extremists in high-security camps like Alva, Oklahoma, but the damage to Nazi ideology was spreading. Every separated moderate became a seed in another compound. Prisoners quietly passed notes. America ist anders. America is different. POWs also encountered America's contradictions. They saw racial discrimination too. In the Deep South, black soldiers guarded white German prisoners, yet those black soldiers could not eat at certain restaurants where the POWs were served. Some Germans mocked this, calling it hypocrisy. Others saw it as proof that the U.S. struggled with its own flaws openly rather than through terror. One POW wrote, in Germany, there is only one truth. In America, there are many and they argue about them constantly. The complexity itself was revelatory. Work detachments created unexpected relationship. Farmers invited POWs for lemonade, baseball game, and even church services, though prisoners remained technically outside the building. Some Americans taught them English. Some listened to their stories of the Russian front. Prisoners painted barns, repaired machinery, played soccer with local teenagers. A young American girl in Nebraska wrote in her diary, "The Germans are not monsters. They are boys. They miss home." Meanwhile, a POW wrote of her family, "I had never met people who treated strangers with such dignity. These interactions did more than break barriers, they rewired assumptions." By 1945, with Germany collapsing, many POWs dreaded going home. Camp newspapers reported that 74% of returning POWs said they now supported democracy, a figure later confirmed by post-war West German political surveys. Thousands applied to stay in America. Nearly 5,000 succeeded, marrying into local families or returning after formal repatriation. Others went back to Germany determined to rebuild it in the image of what they had witnessed: open debate, decentralized power, and a society where the state was not a god. Many became teachers, civil servants, engineers, and politicians in West Germany's emerging democratic institutions. Their experiences in America, picking cotton, eating in diners, observing elections, and watching a society function without fear, became the foundation of their political worldview. The decisive moment came in the summer of 1945, after Germany's surrender. At Camp Hearn in Texas, a War Department survey asked POWs to describe the most surprising thing you witnessed in America. Soldiers expected answers about food, cars, or technology. Instead, one response appeared again and again in different words: freedom. The people here are not afraid. In the final camp assemblies before repatriation, loudspeakers played announcements in German. Prepare for transport. Men who once marched with the swastika now stared at the American flag hanging above the parade ground. Some saluted it. Others bowed their heads. One whispered, "We arrived as enemies. We leave as students." When the German POWs returned home, they brought with them a vision of a society that functioned without indoctrination. In bombed-out towns across West Germany, they described America to their families: the freedom of speech, the absence of secret police, the abundance of food, the role of women in factories, the everyday cultural mixing, and the kindness of ordinary citizens. Far from being propaganda, their testimony carried the weight of lived experience. Historians now argue that these POWs became one of the most influential forces in democratizing post-war Germany. Their stories spread from village halls to political meetings to schools. Thousands worked in the rebuilding of West German civic institutions. Some became journalists, local council members, educators, or civil servants. Others simply raised their children with democratic values. America's greatest victory, they insisted, was not on the beaches of Normandy or in the skies over Europe, but in the quiet fields and bustling towns where POWs saw freedom in action. In the end, the most unusual sight German prisoners encountered in America was not a single moment, but a way of life, unpolished, imperfect, often contradictory, yet free in a way they had never imagined. What they saw on that first day: teenagers laughing at a soda fountain, a black doctor stepping out of a clinic, a woman climbing into a tractor, a farmer criticizing the president without fear, became the compass that redirected thousands of lives. And as they sailed home after the war, they carried with them the quiet revelation that had first struck them on American soil: that the real strength of a nation is not its army, but the everyday freedom of its people.